Hey there, this is Tom with the Diogenes Lamp podcast. I appreciate you listening in, and most importantly, I hope you enjoy what you hear. Before we start with today's episode, I'm going to ask you for a small favor. Believe it or not, history podcasts, especially in their early stages, tend not to be cash cows. Shocker, I know. I too was blindsided by this news. Now, I didn't go into this for the money, I think that much is obvious. But unfortunately, books, research materials, and equipment aren't free. Please, go to patreon.com/Diogenes Lamp Podcast, and for less than the price of a coffee once a month, you can become a member and get access to bonus episodes, recommended reading lists and documentaries, shout-outs, and anything else we'll offer in the future as this project grows. If you are especially broke, hey, I get it, but please, make sure to give us a 5-star review when you listen to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and subscribe to the pod on your preferred podcast listening medium. Your support is appreciated, and more importantly, it is needed in order to keep this operation going. On that note, I hope you have a great day, and now back to the show. Hey everyone. For today's episode, I was able to bring on to the pod Konstantinos Kolokotronis. Konstantinos is an independent journalist and researcher who focuses on geopolitics and contemporary power politics in the Aegean and Eastern Mediterranean. And no, he is not related to the Kolokotronis. I already asked him this question repeatedly. I know my focus on this podcast tends to be more so Greek history, as in what happened decades ago, as opposed to Greek current events, as in what's happening today, last week, or what may happen tomorrow. But what if I told you that the current events that are unfolding today in the Aegean and the Eastern Med are linked to historical events that we've already covered and will cover in the podcast? Events like the signing of the treaties of Sèvres, Lausanne, and Paris, or more specifically, the desire of Turkey to renegotiate or reject these treaties altogether. Today's discussion was on an article Konstantinos wrote titled Zourafa Isle, the Imia of the North Aegean, which zooms in on a tiny Greek isle and hundreds of other islands whose sovereignty is not under debate by anyone, except Turkey, of course. We covered a variety of topics like international law, Greek security concerns, Turkish aggression and expansionism in the Aegean and the East Med, and most of all, we talked about why this conflict is about so much more than just some scattered rocks in an infinitely blue sea. By the way, I know the audio quality is a little rough on this episode, but technology has its limits. Konstantinos was also over 2,000 miles away, and Greece has the worst download and upload speeds in the EU. As in, it is literally ranked last. So please take it up with the Greek Parliament in regards to the connection and the connectivity when we were recording this episode. Please check out Konstantinos' work on substack.com/@polity21blog, where he's written about a lot of interesting topics like this, and of course, support his work. I learned a lot of great stuff today, and I hope you do too as well by listening to this. Enjoy! And for making the time to sit down with us today and talk about this great article that you wrote called Zourafa Isle, the Imia of the North Aegean. You wrote this back in February of 2025. I want to get you on to talk about it, of course, because it is something that I think is very overlooked in Greek current affairs. Everyone knows, of course, of Imia and that kind of thing. I had never heard of Zourafa, and I consider myself at least somewhat privy to the conflict in the Aegean in regards to the gray zones and these smaller islands that really play a central role to that whole quote unquote conflict dispute. Um, let's get right into it. And correct me if I'm wrong. Is it its name is also La? Is the Greek name La Doxera? La Doxera?
Yeah, so the Zourafa is, I think, the Turkish name, or the name that the island was known for throughout the Ottoman Empire for most of the time. Lavoxera, yeah, that would be the Greek name, and it comes, from the olive oil, rather from the oil, actually, the oil, sorry, that comes out from the rock where it is.
Oil?
Uh, so yeah, I mean, apparently there oil, yeah, oil.
Oh wow!
Yeah, so apparently I think there is some oil reserves that are sitting right underneath. And this has been, I think, recorded, as early as the late or middle 19th century. I mean, there are some reports of some of the, first people who, I guess, properly explored or mapped the island. I mean, one of them was a person from Samothrace, the big island, the Greek island that is nearby, is 6 nautical miles to the east, no, sorry, to the west, rather, of Zourafa. And yeah, a very prominent person in the local community, Nicolos Fardis. He was also the mayor, I think, of the island of Samothrace for some time. So, he actually visited the island. He did some preliminary research there, and he found out that yes, there is oil that is coming out of the island, which obviously, I guess suggests that there might be some oil reserve sitting underneath, something like that.
Right. That's very interesting. I mean, the big question, of course, is how large are the reserves, of course, and I feel like we'll find that out eventually now with all the activity that's going on one way or another at some point, perhaps. Um, let me ask you this. Let's get a little more into it. The island specifically, geographically, just for the listeners, where would you situate it, and how big is it in actual size? Does it have infrastructure? Is it inhabited, or is this a tiny, tiny rock? Quite literally a tiny island.
So yeah, I mean, as you said, I think yeah, you partially answered the question. I mean, it's a very tiny island. It used to be bigger back in the day. So I mean, if you read, Nicolos Fardis's report about the island, it says that back in the ancient times there used to be probably 4 islands there. Uh, Now, probably because of earthquakes or coastal erosion, these are all gone now. So they're just this tiny little isle. I think its overall size is like 9 acres. Has a coastline of about, I mean, actually, no, actually, it used to be 9 acres. And then gradually, I think nowadays, due to coastal erosion, the past 100 years or so, it's only 1 acre.
Wow,
Um, so
tiny.
yeah, back in the 19th century, yeah, it's very tiny. So back in the 19th century, when this Greek, intellectual actually and mayor of the island, visited the place, I mean, he reported that was, 9 acres and 465 meters of coastline. But now we know it's only 1 acre and just 32 meters of coastline. Uh, and just,
Wow.
6 nautical miles to the east of Samothrace. Uh, Now, yeah, I mean, if you take a look at the map of Greece, Samothrace is just south of Thrace, as the name also implies.
Hmm.
I guess it's opposite, you could say, south and opposite of Alexandroupolis, which many of your listeners might know. I mean, it's a big port now. It's also being used for logistics by the U.S. Army as well, particularly with the events now in Ukraine, also Ukrainian war. It's uh, it's been the headlines occasionally. It's made the headlines.
Right.
So Zourafa is basically
It's
the northeasternmost part of the Greek territory.
and it seems. I'm sorry to cut you off. A little bit of a lag. I just wanted to say as well that it seems like it's just north of Imvros as well, which, as we know, Imvros is, Turkish island. It's one of the few islands that was awarded to Turkey after Lausanne. Does it have any significance, its location, in terms of where it's located leading out of the straits as well?
Partially, yes. I mean, I guess not so much the straits, but there's the Gulf. There's a Turkish Gulf right opposite, which is called the Gulf of Chiros in Greek. So this whole area there, I mean, they cut it off, with especially with the nautical miles. I mean, there are currently 6 nautical miles. I mean, they extend to 12. And also, if you take into consideration the extending exclusive economic zone, um, I guess you could say, yeah, it could kind of seal that place off, right? So for defense purposes, it is important because, Gulf of Chiros could potentially be used by Turkish naval forces uh, in case of any, I don't know, operation that's targeting, let's say, North Aegean or Thrace, so it could be used as a supportive role. And I mean, I'm not exactly an expert in those matters, but, I've, got some interviews, as far as that thing goes. I mean, admirals, highlight its importance as far as nautical operations and naval warfare goes in that particular region.
Gotcha. Makes sense. I mean, if you look at it geographically, its location, I mean, if Greece were to expand it from 6 to 12 nautical miles, it quite literally, not literally, but, it'd suffocate the Aegean for the Turks, anyways, and under their perception of things,
Yeah.
um, of course. But let's get into a bit. Let's get more into some context here because, I mean, we only have an hour or so,
Yeah.
right? So, you could write books on this and people try to write books on this, but just some general things leading up to this. And we'll just briefly touch. We don't even have to briefly touch on these, but we'll just write them down like a list.
Mhm.
You have 1923 Lausanne. Obviously, this delineates Greece's borders with Turkey primarily. Yada yada. Treaty of Paris in 1947. Greece gets the Dodekanis Islands. We have the conflict with, the invasion and occupation of Cyprus in 1974. There's another conflict in 1987, the Sismek incident, I believe it's called.
Yes, yeah.
I believe with Papandreou. I could be incorrect. Yeah.
Mhm.
And then, most famously, which I think draws a solid parallel with Zourafa, we can compare and contrast a lot, is Imia, or the Kardak in Turkish crisis, which is like late January of 1996. And yeah, so according to Lausanne, let's touch on Lausanne and work our way back a little bit. What's the official or the legal status, according to Lausanne, of these hundreds of islands, right? Whether they're isles as small as
Yeah. So I
Zourafa or
mean,
large islands as big as
yeah.
Crete.
So it's Article 12 of the Lausanne Treaty, which says basically that any, island that lies, beyond 3 nautical miles of the Turkish coastline, of the Anatolian coastline, Turkey has no sovereign rights over them, no sovereignty actually over them. So they have to be Greek. That's what the Treaty of Lausanne says verbatim. Now, I
It's
guess what
very
the Turkish argument
straightforward,
is,
right?
yeah, it's pretty straightforward, yeah. But what the Turkish argument is that because the Treaty of Lausanne does not explicitly state the name of all those islands, which are in the hundreds, actually. I mean, there are hundreds of islands that. I mean, there's approximately. I mean, they haven't named them all, but it's approximately up to 150 islands. That little islands, a lot of them uninhabited, some of them inhabited, that Turkey currently claims. So a lot of these islands are not named in the Treaty of Lausanne or in any other related treaties, or the Treaty of Paris, for example, 1947, which regards the status of the Dodecanese. But what all of these treaties say, they talk about islands that are dependent basically upon others. So, for example, they mention Rhodes and its dependent islands. That obviously would include the wording suggests that this includes all the other little islets, rocks that do not need to be named in the treaty, right? And keep in mind that I guess the legal definition of an island is basically anything that stands above sea level at high tide, right? I mean, otherwise, if it's covered, then it's not an island. It just happens to be a rock that is occasionally above sea level,
Right.
then later submerges. So we are not concerned with these. Now Zourafa again, yeah, it's not mentioned in the treaties, and Imia also was not mentioned in the treaties, and this is what gave, I guess, not the legal leeway, but this was, I guess, the political context that Turkey needed, to, I guess, to at a minimum, to back up its claims with the impression that
This is
they
the
had
Turkish
some legal backing.
argument.
The Turkish argument, yes. I mean, also, as far as the Dodecanism goes, yeah, anemia, Turkey is not a part of the, 1947 Paris Treaty, right? Yeah, so, they cannot have a claim on a treaty that they're not a member of, right? So that's also another, I guess, legal argument on the side of Greece. Yeah, but anyways, I mean, yes, as you know, some of the listeners might know, yeah, 1996 Syria crisis. That's when there was a political vacuum in Greece. I mean, Papandreou had recently died. Kostas Simitis was the newly sworn in prime minister of PASOK. So I guess from the Turkish side of things, yes, it was an ideal time to present some of its claims in a more practical manner. I mean, now as far as the international context goes, we're talking about post-Cold War. Not that it really matters in the Greek context. Things didn't change very dramatically as far as that part of the world goes. But there was also, I mean, as of 1995, there was a casus belli, that Turkey had declared on the potential expansion of the Greek territorial sea from 6 nautical miles, which is the current status quo, to 12 nautical miles. So I guess against that backdrop, that specific backdrop, that is what they need to show, that they cannot allow the Greeks to maximize the territorial sea at the 12 nautical miles, and in addition to also introduce this novel claim at the time, where islets, rocks, that they're not included in the treaties, that whose status could be disputed by Turkey.
Understood. Understood. So, I mean, have there been any conflicts similar to the Imia crisis in Zourafa, similar to what we had in Imia?
No, no, no. I mean, no. I mean, after Emias, yeah, there were, no ships, no troops, no flags. I mean, obviously, the islands are still under Greek sovereignty, but technically, you can say it was a Turkish success in as far as this whole area, it's basically it's a no-go zone for any kind of military equipment from either country. No, I mean we don't have that as far as Rafa goes. What usually happens is that there are a lot of Turkish fishermen who go there to fish a lot. And now they also happen to have larger vessels. They're better equipped compared to the smaller and fewer actually Greek fish boats. So this is the kind of activity that we have there. And occasionally, obviously, there is a Turkish coast guard which violates Rafa's territorial waters. Yeah.
So, speaking of Turkish fishermen, in your article, you mentioned a very specific Turkish fisherman. I was totally caught off guard that this was even a thing. There's a Turkish fisherman, Ilker Ozdemir, and he's essentially a known provocateur, um, who his job, his position, this is what he's taken upon himself in life, is to provoke Greek authorities by illegally entering into fishing zones, Greek fishing zones near Zourafa. And he even shares his activity on YouTube, believe it or not. He has something like 150,000 subscribers on YouTube, which blows my mind. He actually just bought a new boat, which he named Mavi Vatan as well, which blows my mind. I mean, this is an insane hobby to have on on the weekends, right?
I
And
think
there
his
was an
older boat
incident
was
too.
Kizil Elma, right? Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Sorry.
Oh no, go ahead. What was the other boat?
I think his previous boat was called the Kizil Elma, which is like Red Apple. And I think that was the boat that was involved in the incident that I was referring to in the article. But yeah, I mean, yeah, probably he got a new boat. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised.
Ah, and it's interesting you say Red Apple because if I'm not mistaken, I believe Red Apple is what they referred Mehmet referred to Constantinople as. Let me see. Yeah, exactly. Red Apple refers to the ambitions of the Ottomans to capture Constantinople. Wow. I did not know that, Konstantina. Thank you for. I had no idea. Jeez. So both his boats are named after super nationalistic neo-Ottoman essentially type stuff. I mean, neo-Ottomanism, Kemalism, you know, tomato, tomato. Mavi Vatan, would you like to explain Mavi Vatan for the listeners? I'm already pretty up to date on it, but I know a lot of the listeners will not know what Mavi Vatan is. Would you like to get into that a little bit?
So yeah, Vatan, or Blue Homeland in English. I mean, it's the culmination basically of all Turkish claims at the expense of Greek and Cypriot sovereignty since 1973. Right, that's when we have the issue of the delimitation of maritime continental shelves, maritime zones. That's when it first emerges. When the Turkish Petroleum Organization publishes some leases that concern the Aegean Sea, which obviously there is this dispute that comes up, where we draw the line, between the maritime zones, which are Greek, which are Turkish. So what's the role of the Greek islands that dominated the Aegean Sea in this kind of delimitation? Gradually over the time, as we know, there are additional claims that were added to these, such as the extent of Greek territorial waters, that there is the active casus belli on that, the extent of the national airspace, the flight information region, the Athens flight information region, which covers the entirety of the Aegean Sea, which Turkey also disputes. So gradually, in the space of like 50 years, I mean, Turkey gradually sought to, systematize these claims. And in 2019, we have the Moivatan doctrine, which, I mean, you have seen the map. It covers
It's a
at
crazy
least half of
map.
the Aegean Sea.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a
half of the
totally
Aegean
bonkers
Sea,
map.
a large chunk, of the Eastern Mediterranean. There's absolutely no regard of the Greek islands, which are basically included in what Turkey views as the Turkish Sea area, the claimed maritime space. It's as if those islands are sitting on platforms, as one Greek analyst put it, Konstantinos Kolokotronis, I believe. Yeah. So they have no rights. They have no right to exclusive economic zone. As far as Turkish view goes, only the 6 nautical miles which they currently have.
And this runs contrary to all international law that we currently have as of right now, any interpretation of anything according to seas.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which Turkey has not signed into law. But this does not concern anyone. For example, even the United States, they have not signed UNCLOS. But UNCLOS is what we call, has become customary international law as a way of international practice, because everybody practices it, because a large majority of nations have already signed it. That also means that it doesn't matter whether you have not signed or not. Its validity still holds, even in those cases, between a dispute between a signatory of the treaty, that is Greece, and the country that has not signed it, like Turkey.
Wow. Wow, wow, wow. And it really blows my mind with the Mavi Vatan thing as well, because this is a doctrine that they are now have incorporated into students' education. Ninth graders are now being taught that Mavi Vatan is something that is owed to Turkey. There's a quote here from this is actually from Turkish Ministry of Education. It says, and quote, the value of patriotism will be emphasized by including Turkey's justified struggle against demands that ignore its legal and geographical rights in the Sea of Islands, the Aegean Sea, and the Eastern Mediterranean. The importance of Cyprus for Turkey and the Turkish world will be mentioned. Obviously, this is very troubling thing to be teaching, impressionable teenagers, and you give it also that you have an entire generation growing up essentially under Erdogan and the government teaching the same thing, the long-term consequences can be really catastrophic for a society. Um, that's nuts. It's really unfortunate.
Yeah, and that's the interesting part, that, Blue Homeland's two founders, two intellectual fathers, you might say. It's Cihat Yayci, Turkey's retired admiral, and Cem Gürdenis, right? So these are the two guys who came up with the idea, right, which has existed since 2006. Now, Jihad Yaitse is became, I guess, more famous in Greece because he was the guy who came up with also, completely, how should I put it, creative, you might say, lack for a better word, maritime delimitation between Libya and Turkey, right? Which completely ignores, the fifth largest island in the Mediterranean, Crete. Completely ignores the rights of that island, acts as if it doesn't exist at all. So he was the one responsible for that, and Cem Gürden is the guy who, more broadly came up with this idea that Turkey needs to be more militant and more active as far as maritime affairs go, and sea power more specifically. It's traditionally a more continental power, at least in the past 100 years. I mean, Greeks are more, you might say, are more seaworthy as far as our civilization goes, as far as Hellenic naming goes. I mean, we might lack, we don't have very new ships. I mean, the Hellenic navy is aging quite fastly, but as far as the seaworthiness goes, the crew, the personnel, I mean, this has been, very often said that they're more professional. I mean, they've sailed the seas for many times. So this precisely, I guess, what people like Cem Gürden is like to overturn, to make the Turkish people a more, a maritime nation, and claim this zone, this maritime zone extending from Anatolia, over at least, half of the Aegean Sea, a large chunk of the Eastern Mediterranean, and this is a roadmap to effectively becoming a regional hegemon, right? The entire Eastern Mediterranean region. And that will be at the expense of Greece, first and foremost, Cyprus, of course, half of which is occupied. And also, we could say this will have also negative reverberations for countries like Israel, which is also a Mediterranean country, very powerful as well. So these are the stakes. Now, I mean, the interesting thing about it is that both these people connect to the story of Zourafa as well, right? So, when this fisherman, Ilker Özdemir, when he illegally sailed into Zourafa, he was fishing there, and he was intercepted by the Greek Coast Guard. I think it was the summer of 2024. There were allegations, and I mean, it did happen in all likelihood that the Greek Coast Guard, sailed very closely with his boat, possibly rammed it as well, so it caused some damage. I mean, I think all of the glass, were broken. And I think one of the first person that he called was one of the Turkish Coast Guard. Actually, was Cem Gürdenis. He called the
Who's a
founder
general.
of the Blue Homeland to general, the retired, sorry, admiral. Actually,
Wow.
he called him to let him know what happened to Raf. So it's clear, that he is he's acting as they put it,
An
a very active,
advocate?
fervent advocate, proponent of the Blue Homeland doctrine, but also in practice, this is not about theory anymore. He is actively promoting the Turkish claims in the region. And so Cem Gürdenis was the first person that he called. I mean, I think if you look up, you will find even a tweet by Cem Gürdenis on Twitter or X, which talks about the incident. That the Turkish fisherman called him and let him know about what happened.
Yeah, it really blows my mind. Yeah, I've watched the video actually, where the Greek Coast Guard kind of sideswipes a little bit the boat. Um, Mind you, warnings were given to leave the area. This is kind of the standard practice, right? When you don't comply, things tend to happen. It's just all of this stuff, and then you connect everything, all the Mavi Vatan, the Blue Homeland. You have provocateurs like this, whose job it is to kind of propagate this, these dangerous, unrealistic, illegal ideas and whatnot. And then, you combine that, and, like, to the outside person, I think sometimes the Greeks come off as, well, we did once upon a time. I think now that, other people and other communities are waking up to that these are very real concerns. They're very valid, and they have been for some time now. But you combine all that with, there's this, I'm sure you're very familiar with Nordic Monitor, but there was a leaked, in some kind of court proceeding or something, there was a leaked, essentially, invasion plan for the Aegean. They don't know when it's from exactly, but there's about 150 islands or so. Zourafa's on it. It's, you know, um, So it's not Zourafa's on it. My wife's island is on it. Many islands are on it. Ios, Samos, etc., etc. Essentially, it overlaps with the Mavi Vatan map naturally.
Yeah, I mean that's the issue. That there were all those little tiny islands, and like Imia back then. Um, that's what I guess what was also the perceived failure of the Greek strategy in the context of the Imia crisis. That Turkey was able to circumvent Greek defenses, advance without attacking the Greek forces, and at the same time occupy one of those islands briefly. But nevertheless, it had an effect, as we can see nowadays. That Greece, is very hesitant to exercise its sovereign rights in those areas, just because it fears another provocation, the repeat of the Imia crisis. That does not mean, obviously, that there is no good presence in a place like Zourafa, like Imia, where it is significantly reduced. But at the same time, I mean, one can see, a lot of people are talking about, this idea of Finlandization, right? I mean, you might be familiar with the concept that, anything that Greek does, even if it is within its legal and sovereign limits, it always has to think about the Turkish reaction. I mean, not necessarily ask for permission, but, this freedom of action is essentially compromised.
Are we trapped? This is kind of a side question, but I've never professionally studied foreign policy or anything like that, but I read about it a lot. Are we almost trapped in that respect in a kind of security dilemma with Turkey in that respect, almost like a sovereignty dilemma in that respect? Then, where us practicing our own sovereignty by maintaining these simple islands is always going to have to say, like you said, the Finlandization. Always going to have to be worried about how this will provoke Turkey and how it affected. Even though the irony of it is these are our own sovereign islands, right?
Yeah, I guess I mean, security dilemma exists, when I mean, it's very tragic in nature, when there's like two countries, they care about their own defenses, their own defensive posture, but they inadvertently get into the arms competition and conflict, right? I guess the idea behind it is that they both have defensive intentions and they care about their own defense. Now, I mean, we know that Greece is not threatening Turkey. I mean, nobody thinks, the right mind thinks that, those islands, the Eastern Aegean islands, are not going to act as springboards for an invasion, as they did back in
Right,
1919. I mean, these days are over.
right.
Greece is a status quo power. It wants to protect what it has. It does not covet what Turkey has. So, I mean, I guess technically, I don't think it's a security dilemma. And that's because there's no dilemma here. I mean, it's
Right.
it's it's very clear what the Turkish intentions are, and we know what they are. They have told us very clearly with the Maritime Homeland Doctrine. So there's nothing surprising here in the long term, I think. Even though a lot of people in Greece like to act like that, they're constantly surprised by what is happening. Uh, but we know that every year or every few years, the Turkish claims are multiplying. They're becoming ever more assertive, and this is the long-term trend here. Yeah.
Yeah. It's. I mean, I don't want to use the word that it looks hopeless or that it looks. I don't want to give a pessimistic outlook on everything, but I mean, short of very serious changes on Turkey's behalf, I don't see how the trend changes. Frankly, or of course, international leadership, which is sorely lacking these
Mm.
days, given current events in the United States. Well, on that note, I think we'll just leave it there. We covered everything in this great article titled "Zourafa Isle, the Imia of the North Aegean." Really appreciate the time, Mr. Konstantinos Kolokotronis. And we'll have you on again
Pleasure.
to talk about something else, I'm sure, because there's a lot of great stuff. Please support Konstantinos' Substack, Polity24, great articles on defense. What would you like? How would you describe it, Konstantin? I think that you'd have a better job of explaining your own Substack.
The Substack or Polity 21? I mean, yeah, I mean, Polity 21 started in 2021. Uh, Roughly, yeah. I mean, it really took off, I think, in 2022. I mean, gradually it had a more broader, I guess, uh, purview. It was just all about, conflict, started covering the Ukraine war and so on. Gradually became a bit more specialized. as far as Eastern Mediterranean goes, with Turkish affairs. And so yeah, that I
Awesome.
guess that is also the focus of my Substack. Yeah.
I was going to say there's a lot of really interesting niche things that you write about. I mean, stuff just like this, like Zourafa. Very few people I've never heard of Zourafa. Greece's rearmament program and a lot of stuff on current events. If you're at all into current geopolitics, frankly, and foreign policy, especially in the Eastern Mediterranean, um, great stuff. Really interesting. Thanks again, and we'll have you back on again.